A beautiful romantic story between a millionaire and a poor candy seller. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below with the name of the great love of your life. I'll leave a heart for each of you. The biting wind blew through the busy streets of San Francisco, dragging dry leaves that piled up on the sidewalks. Sophia Bennett clutched her battered coat against her body as she carefully arranged the boxes of sweets on the small makeshift table. Her eyes, clear as a spring day, reflected the determination of someone who had learned to survive on little. "Are you sure you can stay here late, darling? Is today a good sales day?" asked a hoarse, tired voice behind her. It was her father, Richard, who was sitting in a wheelchair. His pale, weather-beaten face showed the years of battle against an illness that never seemed to let up. Sophia knelt down beside him, holding his hand lovingly. "I'll try, Dad. We just need to sell a bit more to pay for the consultation. I promise we'll manage." Richard tried to smile, but his expression showed the pain he was in, both physically and emotionally. Sophia got up and returned to her position behind the desk, calling out to the few passers-by. Hours passed and the cold seemed to intensify. Sophia glanced at the cheap watch strapped to her wrist, feeling her desperation grow. Sales were slow, and the bills seemed to grow like a shadow chasing them. Then a luxurious black car pulled up on the corner, right at the traffic lights. From the back seat, Alexander Sterling watched the scene with apparent indifference. His driving assistant, Matthew, was talking on the phone, but Alexander couldn't hear a word. He was fixated on the figure of Sophia, who, with cracked lips and trembling hands, was still trying to offer her sweets with a resilient smile. Matthew hung up the phone and started driving again. "Stop the car, Matthew." Matthew stared at him, surprised. "Sir, we're late for the meeting with the investors. I told you to stop the car." The driver obeyed, and Alexander got out, adjusting his overcoat. As he approached the table, Sophia looked at him cautiously. He was intimidating with his penetrating gaze and impeccable posture. "How much are the sweets?" he asked, his voice deep but without any apparent emotion. Sophia tried to disguise her nervousness. Men like him didn't show up in places like that. $2 each, sir." Alexander took a $50 bill from his pocket and put it on the table. "I'll take them all." Sophia was stunned. Before she could thank him, he started to walk away, but Richard, noticing something different about the man, called out to him, "Hold on, you need to take the sweets. Why are you doing this?" Alexander stopped, but didn't turn around. "Maybe because I know what it's like to need it," he replied, before getting back into the car and disappearing into the night. Sophia remained motionless for a few seconds, staring at the money and the sweets on the table. Something about that encounter had made her uneasy, but she didn't have time to ponder it. Her focus was now on paying for Richard's appointment. Later, when she arrived at the small apartment where they lived, the weight of responsibility fell on her again. The sound of her father's cough echoed down the hallway as Sophia put water on to boil in the small kitchen. "You need to rest, Dad," she said, entering the room with a cup of tea. "I'll make your appointment tomorrow." Richard held her hand again, this time more tightly. "Sophia, if something happens to me—" "Don't say that," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "You need to think about the future. You can't sacrifice your life for me." Richard's words echoed in Sophia's mind throughout the night. As she lay in her bed, wrapped in thin blankets, images of the man who had bought all her sweets invaded her thoughts. Who was he? Why had he stopped and helped her like that? The next morning, Alexander found an excuse to stop by the same place. He wasn't sure why he was there, but the memory of the young woman and her father had stirred something inside him that he preferred not to explore. When he saw Sophia again, still standing in the same spot, his firm expression briefly relaxed. Sophia noticed him before he said anything. He seemed out of place in that environment, with his impeccable suit and rigid posture. As he approached, she felt her heart race, but she remained professional. "Good morning, sir. I really wanted to thank you for yesterday. Can I offer you any sweets today?" Alexander didn't answer immediately. His eyes passed quickly over the boxes arranged on the table, and then to Richard, who was staring at him with a curious look. "How much are all the sweets?" he finally asked. Sophia blinked, confused. "All of them? Again?" "Yes, all of them." She swallowed, did the math before answering. $50. "But that's a lot, sir." Alexander took a wad of bills from his inside jacket pocket and put them on the table. "Here you go, but you can have the sweets again." Consider it a completed sale. Before Sophia could react, he took an envelope out of his pocket and left it next to the money. When you've finished here, read this. It might be of interest to you. But Sophia tried to argue, but Alexander had already turned away. He then went on his way, leaving Sophia and Richard puzzled. Sophia picked up the envelope carefully, looking at Richard, who seemed as perplexed as she was. "Are you going to open it?" he asked. She hesitated. Something about that man made her uneasy, but curiosity spoke louder. Sophia slowly tore open the envelope, revealing an elegant card with the logo of a large company. The card read, "Alexander Sterling, CEO of Sterling Enterprises. Contact me if you are interested in an opportunity." Sophia's breath caught. What did he want? Why would someone like him be interested in helping her? Richard frowned, noticing his daughter's unease. "Sophia, don't you find this strange?" "Very strange," she admitted, putting the card in her pocket. The rest of the day passed in a blur of doubts. As she pushed her father's wheelchair back to the small apartment they shared, Sophia couldn't help but wonder what that encounter meant. That night, while Richard slept, she sat at the kitchen table with the card in her hands, feeling torn between hope and fear. What could that man want with someone like her? But deep down, Sophia knew that the next day would bring answers, or even more questions. It was a long night for Sophia. She couldn't get the meeting with Alexander out of her mind, and the card rested on the table like a mysterious promise. Who was that man? Why would he, someone so far removed from the humble world she knew, offer her anything? At dawn, Sophia was already awake, staring at the card again. The phone number seemed to beckon her like an irresistible invitation. Richard came into the kitchen, rubbing his tired eyes and leaning on his wheelchair with effort. "Are you still thinking about it?" he asked, noticing his daughter's lost expression. "Yes, Dad, it doesn't make sense. Why would someone like him help someone like me?" She ran her hands through her hair, restless. Richard gave her a weak smile. "Sometimes opportunities come in ways we don't understand. Maybe you should give it a chance." Sophia looked at her father and saw a mixture of pride and concern in his eyes. He was right. She couldn't let fear stop her from trying. With trembling fingers, she picked up the phone and dialed the number. The line rang a few times before a firm but polite voice answered. "Alexander Sterling's office. Who do I speak to?" Sophia took a deep breath before answering. "My name is Sophia Bennett. I've received an invitation from Mr. Sterling to get in touch." There was a brief silence, and she almost thought the call would be terminated, but then the voice came back, more formal this time. "Miss Bennett, Mr. Sterling will be expecting you at his office at 3 p.m. today. I'll send you the address by message." Before Sophia could say anything, the call ended. She stared at the phone in shock, her heart pounding. It was real. At 3 p.m. sharp, Sophia stood at the entrance to the imposing Sterling Enterprises building. The glass facade reflected the San Francisco sky, and Sophia felt even smaller than usual. With her heart in her throat, she crossed the lobby, feeling out of place amidst the gleaming marble and the well-dressed people hurrying past. Upstairs, a receptionist took her to Alexander's office. It was a minimalist environment, with sophisticated furniture and windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city. Alexander was sitting behind a dark wooden desk, but stood up when he saw her enter. "Miss Bennett," he said with a slight smile, "I'm so glad you've come." "I still don't know why I'm here, Mr. Sterling," replied Sophia, trying to hide her nervousness. "Alexander," he corrected, gesturing for her to sit down. Sophia obeyed, but remained tense. "You must be wondering why I made that offer," he began, leaning on the table with his hands folded. "I'll be straightforward. I need someone like you." Sophia frowned. "Someone like me, young, determined, and with a natural understanding of social media. My marketing team has insisted that in order for the company to grow, I need to invest in my personal social media presence. And frankly, I don't have the patience for that." Sophia blinked in surprise. "Social media?" Alexander nodded. "That's right. I want you to be my personal assistant for this project. Create content, manage interactions, teach me how to handle it. You're young, so you probably understand how these things work better than I do." She was silent for a moment, processing the proposal. "But I have no experience with it. I only know how to use them because I use my personal ones." "It's not a problem," Alexander interrupted. "I believe in people's potential. And you strike me as someone who learns quickly, and more than that, you're determined. You must have a big goal in life, and I like working with people like that." Sophia swallowed. The offer was unexpected, but she couldn't deny that it was a chance to change her life and give her father the best treatment. "I accept," she said at last, her voice firm. Alexander smiled, pleased. "Good. We start tomorrow." The first few days in the new job were like a whirlwind. Sophia immersed herself in Alexander's social media world, coming up with ideas for short videos, photos, and even more elaborate campaigns. Despite her efforts, she couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. The environment was sophisticated and competitive, and Sophia, with her simple clothes and humble manner, seemed out of place. One afternoon, while she was organizing some files, one of her co-workers approached her. "So you're Mr. Sterling's new assistant," said the woman, whose tone was as sharp as her heels. "It's funny that he hired someone so inexperienced." Sophia felt her cheeks burn, but pretended to ignore the comment. In the evenings at home, she tried to balance work with looking after Richard. Cooking, cleaning, and making sure he took his medication left little time for rest. Even so, she refused to complain. "Is everything all right at work, Sophia?" Richard asked as she prepared dinner. "It is. It's just different. I feel so small in that place, Dad. They look at me as if I don't belong." Richard held her hand, his gaze full of affection. "You belong wherever you want to be. Never doubt that." The next morning, while Alexander was going over some of Sophia's ideas for posts, he noticed her restlessness. "You're doing well, Sophia," he said suddenly, without taking his eyes off the computer screen. "Me?" she asked, incredulous. "Yes, and don't let anyone make you think otherwise." Alexander's words surprised Sophia, and she realized that, behind that rigid facade, there was someone who understood her more than she had imagined. But the journey had only just begun, and Sophia felt that this work was more than it seemed at first glance. Something about Alexander and all of this was still a mystery, and she knew that there was much more behind this man than he was willing to show. The days at Alexander Sterling's office were exhausting for Sophia, but something inside her was beginning to change. She couldn't deny that the environment was challenging, but the judgmental looks and whispered comments about her simplicity still made her uncomfortable. Every time she passed through the corridors, she felt people measuring her appearance, and this undermined her confidence. Alexander, with his keen perception, soon noticed Sophia's withdrawn behavior. He saw her trying harder than necessary, trying to hide her insecurity behind polite smiles. During a meeting to discuss content ideas, he decided to take action. "Sophia," he said casually, while leafing through a report, "come to my office after the meeting." Sophia felt a chill in her stomach. Had she done something wrong? She spent the rest of the meeting restless, but when she entered his office later, Alexander was calm, almost relaxed. "I want to talk about your work," he began, but before Sophia could respond, he raised his hand. "You're doing very well. In fact, better than I expected." She blushed at the compliment, but he continued, "I noticed, however, that you still don't seem comfortable here." Sophia hesitated. I don't know if I belong here, Mr. Sterling." Alexander gently interrupted her. "Alexander," she nodded, still shy. "Sophia, I know the pressure here can be intense, especially with people like some we have in this building." He paused, looking directly into her eyes. "I want to help you. I'll advance you part of your payment. Use it as you like, but if I may suggest, invest in something that makes you feel confident." Sophia was paralyzed, not knowing how to react. She knew she needed the money, but part of her felt ashamed for accepting something so personal. "It's not charity, Sophia," he said, reading her thoughts. "It's an investment. When you feel good about yourself, you'll work even better." Alexander's sincerity was what convinced her. She accepted the advance, thanking him with a smile he rarely saw on her face. The next morning, when Sophia entered the office, all eyes inevitably fell on her. Wearing an elegant navy blue blazer and matching tailored pants, with her hair tied up in a delicate bun, she looked like a completely different person. The chatter in the corridor stopped as she passed, but Sophia held her head high, refusing to be intimidated. However, the look that affected her the most was Alexander's. He was in the main hall when she arrived, and when he saw her, his eyes went wide for a moment, before he returned to his usual restrained expression. "Good morning, Sophia," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Good morning, Alexander," she replied, trying to ignore the heat she felt when she realized he was surprised. Later, during a team meeting, Matthew, Alexander's assistant, couldn't hide his interest in Sophia. He sat next to her, starting casual conversations whenever he could, which didn't go unnoticed by Alexander. "Sophia, if you need any help with anything, you can come to me," said Matthew, smiling in a slightly exaggerated way. Alexander, who was watching from his seat at the front, felt something he didn't immediately recognize. It was like a twinge of discomfort, mixed with irritation. "Matthew," he said abruptly, interrupting the conversation, "please concentrate on your work. Sophia doesn't need any help to do what she does better than the rest of us." The room fell silent, and Matthew leaned back in his chair, clearly annoyed. Sophia looked at Alexander, surprised by the firmness in his voice. Later, when they were alone in the office, Sophia decided to confront him. "Alexander, why did you talk to Matthew like that? He was just being nice." Alexander adjusted his collar, uncomfortable. "I don't want him to divert his attention. We have a lot of work to do." Sophia laughed softly, taking him by surprise. "You look jealous. Don't worry, I'm not going to work for him. I've already found the best boss I could have." He visibly tensed up but tried to disguise it. "Me? Jealous? Don't talk nonsense, Sophia. I just don't want him to mix things up." She smiled, realizing that there was something about that serious man that she still didn't fully understand. Their relationship began to change in subtle ways. Alexander, who had previously seemed so untouchable, began to show a more human and awkward side. Recording for social media was a big challenge for him, as his shyness in front of the camera often caused him to get the script wrong. "Alexander, relax. You don't have to be so formal," said Sophia, trying to help him. "I'm not good at this, Sophia," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Talking into a camera doesn't come naturally to me. So, imagine you're talking to me. Just me." He looked at her, and something in his expression changed. For the first time, Alexander managed to record a complete sentence without stuttering, but things didn't always go so smoothly. On one of the recording days, Alexander made so many mistakes that he ended up laughing at himself. A rare sight. "Maybe you should fire me," he joked, still laughing, "and lose my best influencer." "No way," replied Sophia, laughing along with him. The lightness of the moments they shared brought them closer together. Sophia began to feel more at ease around Alexander, and he, in turn, seemed more relaxed when he was with her. The two often found themselves smiling during the recordings, their barriers beginning to crumble. That evening, while reviewing the recorded videos, Sophia noticed something. In Alexander's little mistakes, in the moments when he let his guard down and laughed at himself, there was a side of him that was almost endearing. She didn't know exactly what she felt, but she began to admire this man in a way she had never imagined. On the other side of the city, Alexander was sitting in his living room, looking at the reflection of the city through the windows. Thinking of Sophia, he realized that her presence was beginning to fill spaces that he hadn't even known were empty. The days turned into weeks, and Sophia began to find a fine balance between her work and caring for Richard. However, while her routine at the office became more comfortable, her father's state of health went in the opposite direction. Every day seemed like a cruel reminder that time was relentless. One evening, when she arrived home after another long day of recordings and meetings, Sophia found Richard more haggard than usual. He was sitting in his wheelchair, staring at the window with a lost look on his face. "Dad, haven't you eaten?" she asked worriedly when she saw the untouched plate on the table. "I had no appetite, Sophia," he replied, his voice weak. "Don't worry about me." Sophia knelt down beside him, holding his hand, which was colder than usual. "How can I not worry? You're all I have." Richard tried to smile, but the pain in his eyes was evident. "And you're all I have, Sophia. But I don't want you to be attached to me. You deserve so much more." She felt a lump in her throat, but refused to cry. "Don't say that, Dad. You're my priority. You always will be." He stroked her face with difficulty, his eyes watering. "You have such a big heart. I just hope that life treats you with the kindness you deserve." The next morning, Sophia felt something different as she left for work. An invisible weight seemed to press down on her chest. In the office, she tried to concentrate, but thoughts of her father wouldn't leave her alone. Alexander noticed her restlessness during a meeting and called her to talk in private. "You're distracted today," he observed, crossing his arms. It's my father," Sophia admitted, fighting back tears. "He's not well." Alexander tilted his head, his expression softening. "If you need a break, Sophia, you can take it. Your family comes first." "I can't," she shook her head. "If I stop, everything will fall apart." Alexander was silent for a moment, analyzing her. "You don't have to carry everything yourself." His words echoed in her mind, but Sophia didn't know how to share the weight she felt. 2 weeks later, Richard's situation worsened. One night he had a respiratory crisis, and Sophia had to rush him to hospital. The waiting room seemed suffocating, every minute dragging by as she waited for news. When the doctor finally appeared, Sophia knew from his expression that the news was not good. "Your father is very weak, Miss Bennet. We're doing our best to keep him comfortable, but perhaps it's time to prepare for the worst." The words hit Sophia like a blow. She entered the room where Richard was, the constant sound of the machines monitoring his vital signs echoing in the room. He opened his eyes slowly when he saw her. "Sophia, I'm here, Dad. I don't want you to suffer for me. Promise me you'll be happy, even when I'm no longer here." Sophia held his hand tightly, the tears finally flowing freely. "Don't say that. You'll get better, I know you will. My stubborn little girl went always trying to fix everything." His words were like a knife in her heart. The next morning, while she was in hospital, Sophia received a message from Alexander. He wanted to know if everything was all right. Unable to hide her pain any longer, she replied briefly, telling him about Richard's situation. A short time later, Alexander showed up at the hospital. He was dressed simply, without the usual formality, but with the same imposing presence. "You didn't have to come," said Sophia, surprised to see him at the door. "Are you alone in this?" he asked, ignoring the formality. Sophia nodded, and Alexander entered the room, looking at Richard, who was unconscious. "I've been here before," he said quietly, as if speaking to himself. Sophia stared at him, confused. "When my father died, I was alone too," he continued, his eyes fixed on the man on the bed. "I know what that pain is like, Sophia." His words opened up a new understanding between the two of them. Alexander wasn't just the rich, successful man Sophia saw. He was someone who also knew loss, someone who understood what she was going through. "You don't have to be strong all the time," he said, turning his gaze to her. The tears that Sophia had been trying to hold back overflowed, and Alexander, without hesitation, hugged her. It was a simple gesture, but full of meaning. For the first time in a long time, Sophia felt that she wasn't alone. That night, Richard died. Sophia held his hand until his last breath, whispering words of love and gratitude. When it was all over, she left the room feeling empty, as if the world had lost all its colors. Alexander was there, waiting in the hallway. He didn't say anything, just stood next to her, a silent pillar amidst the chaos of her emotions. "Thank you for being here," she whispered, her voice broken. "I always will be, Sophia." The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements and deep mourning. Sophia tried to move on, but every corner of the empty apartment reminded her of her father. Alexander visited often, always bringing something: food, flowers, or just his presence. One evening, while going through papers left by Richard, Sophia looked at Alexander, feeling a gratitude she couldn't express. "Why are you doing all this for me?" He looked at her seriously. "Because you would do the same for someone else." Sophia didn't know what to say. Alexander was an enigma, and although she still didn't fully understand his motivations, she knew that he was becoming an indispensable part of her life. Grief was still a heavy shadow, but for the first time Sophia felt that there was a light at the end of the tunnel, and somehow Alexander seemed to be part of that light. The silence in Alexander Sterling's office was deeper than usual. He was sitting in his chair, looking out at the view of the city, but his mind was elsewhere. Ever since Sophia had moved away to deal with the loss of her father, Alexander had felt an emptiness that work couldn't fill. He went to visit her some days, but not as often as he wanted. Matthew entered the room with some reports, but stopped when he saw that Alexander seemed oblivious. "Mr. Sterling?" Matthew called out hesitantly. Alexander blinked, as if he had been snapped out of a trance. "What's wrong?" he asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "Here are the performance reports for the last few campaigns," said Matthew, placing the papers on the table. He hesitated for a moment before adding, "Sir, you seem to have been distracted lately." Alexander frowned, leaning back in his chair. "I'm fine, just thinking." Matthew didn't insist, but he knew something was different. Alexander Sterling, known for his unwavering composure, was clearly troubled. That afternoon, Alexander had tried to immerse himself in his work, but the memory of Sophia had always surfaced, unexpected and insistent. He remembered the sound of her laughter, the way she encouraged him during the recordings, and the silent strength she carried even in the midst of adversity. Finally, unable to bear the distance, he picked up the phone and dialed Sophia's number. "Hello?" Her voice sounded hoarse but firm. "Sophia, it's me, Alexander." There was a pause, and he almost thought she was going to hang up. "Hi, Alexander. How are you?" he asked, keeping his tone casual, but feeling his heart racing. "I'm trying to cope, getting better every day. I promise I'll get back to work soon. I can't afford to be without it," she replied bluntly. Alexander was silent for a moment before taking courage. "I was thinking, would you like to go out for a while? Take a walk? I think it would do you good." On the other end of the line, Sophia hesitated. Since Richard's death, she had isolated herself, sinking into her grief. He went there every now and then to bring her something, but he didn't stay long. There was something in Alexander's voice that sounded sincere, almost desperate. "Maybe it's a good idea," she said at last. The next day, Alexander went to pick Sophia up from her apartment. When she opened the door, he noticed that despite the sadness still evident in her eyes, there was a renewed determination in her expression. "Where are we going?" she asked, with a small smile. "I thought of something simple, just to walk around the city a bit." The two walked through a nearby park where the leaves fell softly from the trees, creating an almost magical setting. They chatted about trivia, avoiding heavy subjects, and gradually the tension between them dissipated. When they passed an ice cream parlor, Alexander suggested they buy ice cream. "Ice cream? You look like the kind of person who only drinks black coffee," laughed Sophia. Alexander gave a rare smile, feeling surprisingly at ease. "Maybe you're right, but I'm going to try something new." As they sat down on a bench to enjoy the ice cream, Sophia noticed that Alexander seemed more relaxed, almost carefree. "That's strange," she said, looking at him. "What? Seeing you like this, laughing and joking. It doesn't suit the Alexander Sterling I knew." He raised an eyebrow. "Maybe you're getting to know a different version of me." "Maybe." They both laughed, and the atmosphere between them became lighter. During the walk, Alexander made a point of keeping her distracted, telling her funny stories about his childhood and even admitting to some of his gaffes at work. "Did you get a name wrong at a meeting with investors?" Sophia asked, surprised. "Not only did I get it wrong," he said, laughing. "I called the man Mr. Pickles instead of Mr. Pickering." Sophia started laughing so loudly that some people in the park looked in her direction. Alexander couldn't help but smile when he saw her so genuinely happy. As the afternoon drew to a close, Sophia sighed. "Thank you, Alexander. I needed that." "Me too," he admitted, before realizing that he had perhaps said too much. Sophia looked at him, puzzled, but didn't ask. That evening, while Sophia was tidying up the small apartment, something changed inside her. She looked at a photo of Richard on the bookshelf and felt a familiar weight in her chest. But this time there was also a sense of acceptance. She knew that her father would never want to see her standing around, consumed by sadness. The next day at dawn, Sophia picked up the phone and called Alexander. "Good morning, Sophia," he answered, and she noticed the slight enthusiasm in his voice. "Alexander, I wanted to tell you that I'm going back to work tomorrow. I think it's time to occupy my mind." On the other end of the line, Alexander closed his eyes, feeling a relief he didn't know he needed. "It's a good decision, Sophia. I'm sure everyone missed you." "Everyone? Or just you?" she teased with a playful tone that made Alexander smile. "Maybe a bit of both." When she hung up, Alexander stood there holding the phone, trying to disguise the joy he felt to himself. He knew she'd come back for her own reasons, but he couldn't help being excited to have her around again. The next day, Sophia walked into the office, feeling nervous but ready to start again. As soon as she arrived, all eyes were on her. Matthew was the first to approach, smiling broadly. "Sophia." She was finally back. The office was very quiet without you. Before Sophia could reply, Alexander appeared. "Matthew, we need to discuss something in my office," he said, his tone firm. Matthew hesitated but followed Alexander, clearly annoyed. When they reached the room, Alexander closed the door and turned to his assistant. "I want you to keep your distance from Sophia." Matthew's eyes widened in surprise. "What? Why? Why?" Alexander narrowed his eyes. "Because she's here to work, not to deal with distractions." Matthew raised his hands in surrender. "All right, Mr. Sterling, no need to worry." Alexander went back to work, but he knew that what he was really feeling wasn't professional concern. It was something deeper, something he wasn't ready to admit, even to himself. Meanwhile, Sophia began to resume her tasks, feeling grateful for the welcoming environment that Alexander had helped to create. She knew that something was changing between them, but for now she preferred not to name it. The days began to flow again, but nothing would ever be the same. Every moment shared between them seemed to carry a greater meaning, a promise of something yet to come. Sophia's return to work brought a breath of life to Alexander Sterling's office. Her presence brightened the days, and her dedication, combined with her simple and honest manner, meant that she quickly became indispensable. Alexander, however, knew that the connection between them went beyond the professional. Every smile she gave him, every moment they shared on the recordings, made his heart race in a way he had never experienced before. On the other hand, Sophia began to notice small changes in Alexander's behavior. He always seemed to want to be around, finding reasons to interact with her more than necessary. On one particularly quiet day during a break, they were in the studio adjusting the lighting for yet another recording. "I never thought you'd take this social media thing so seriously," joked Sophia, adjusting a camera. Alexander shrugged, his tone relaxed. "Let's just say that someone convinced me that this could be important and that I could do it." Sophia laughed, but noticed the way he was looking at her. There was something different in that look, a mixture of admiration and something deeper, something she didn't want to admit to herself. As the days went by, the two began to spend more time together, sharing confidences in little stolen moments between obligations. One evening, after a long meeting, Sophia was about to leave when Alexander called her into his living room. "Are you leaving already?" he asked, leaning on the edge of the table. "Yes, it's been a long day," she replied, but stopped when she noticed his expression. "I wanted to thank you, Sophia. You've brought something into my life, something I didn't even know I was missing." She felt her cheeks burning, her heart racing. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I just want you to know how important you are to me." The silence that followed was fraught with tension, but before either of them could do or say anything, Matthew entered the room abruptly, breaking the moment. "Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Sterling, but I need you to review a contract." Alexander stepped back, his expression returning to neutral. "Of course. Sophia, good night." She left, feeling confused, but she couldn't ignore the warmth she felt at that moment. As their closeness grew, comments began to circulate in the office. Murmurs about how Alexander seemed to treat Sophia differently began to gain momentum. Some employees whispered about her humble past, while others insinuated that she was trying to win Alexander over out of interest. "Isn't that strange?" Sophia heard one day as she passed two colleagues. "He never paid attention to anyone before, and now, this girl." Sophia tried to ignore it, but the words hit her like knives. When she reached her desk, Alexander appeared as if he knew something was wrong. "Are you all right?" he asked with genuine concern. She tried to smile, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "I am, of course." Alexander didn't believe it, but decided not to press her. One evening after a corporate event, Alexander offered Sophia a lift home. On the way, he finally broached the subject he'd been keeping under wraps. "Sophia, I need to ask you something." "Of course, what is it?" She was distracted, looking out of the window, but turned to face him. "You've been hearing the comments in the office, haven't you?" She was silent for a moment, but nodded. "Yes, but it doesn't matter. I'm used to being judged." Alexander stopped the car in front of her apartment, but didn't turn off the engine. "It does matter to me. I don't want you to suffer because of me." Sophia smiled slightly, but there was sadness in her eyes. "I've already learned that no matter what we do, there will always be people willing to bring us down." Alexander watched her in silence for a moment, feeling a wave of admiration and something stronger, something he could no longer ignore. "Sophia," he began, but interrupted himself. She looked at him expectantly, but he just shook his head. "Good night." The bond between them continued to grow, despite the critical looks and differences that insisted on separating them. On one particularly busy day during a recording session, Alexander made so many mistakes that Sophia couldn't hold back her laughter. "Are you amused by my suffering?" he asked jokingly. "Maybe a little," she replied, laughing even harder. He finally gave in, laughing along with her, and at that moment the weight of their positions and differences seemed to disappear. Later, while they were reviewing the recorded material, Sophia made a casual remark. "You're getting better. Still shy, but improving." "Is that a compliment?" he asked, smiling sideways. "That's the best you're going to get for today." They both laughed, but the moment was interrupted when Matthew entered with a worried expression. "Mr. Sterling, I need to speak to you in private." Alexander nodded, but before he left, he looked at Sophia. "Don't leave before I get back." She just nodded, but after he left, she wondered what he had said. When Alexander returned from his conversation with Matthew, his steps were steady, but his mind was agitated. The sight of Sophia was waiting for him at his desk, distracted as she organized some documents. He approached slowly, as if he wanted to prolong that moment when he could watch her without being noticed. "Sophia, can I take you home today?" he asked, his voice calm but loaded with something he didn't fully understand. Sophia looked up, surprised, but smiled. "Of course, if it's not a bother." It never would be. The drive to her apartment was uneventful, punctuated by casual conversation and light laughter. When they arrived, Sophia hesitated for a moment before opening the door. "Do you want to come in? I can make you some tea." Alexander was surprised by the invitation but nodded. It would be a pleasure. As they entered the small apartment, Alexander realized how the space reflected Sophia. Simple, welcoming, and full of life. There was a photo of her with her father on a picture frame on the bookshelf, and the soft scent of flowers from a small vase in the window filled the room. "Make yourself at home," said Sophia, going into the kitchen. Alexander sat down on the sofa, feeling a little out of place but at the same time curious about every detail of the place. Sophia returned with 2 cups of tea, but as she handed them over, an awkward movement caused one of the cups to slip, spilling the hot liquid on his shirt and her clothes. "God, Alexander, I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, hastily grabbing a cloth. "It's okay, Sophia, it's just a shirt," he said, trying to calm her down, but Sophia wasn't convinced. "Wait here, I'll change and get you something to change into too." She disappeared into a nearby room, while Alexander took off his wet shirt and sighed. A few minutes later, Sophia returned, but Alexander was completely speechless. She had her hair down, still damp from a quick shower, and wore a light dress that fell gracefully over her body. Her appearance was so natural, and at the same time so charming that he couldn't look away. Sophia stopped, noticing the way he was looking at her. "Is everything all right?" she asked, but her voice came out almost as a whisper. "I brought you a clean shirt. It was my father's. I think it fits you." Alexander stood up slowly, walking towards her. His eyes were fixed on hers, and each step seemed to carry an almost palpable tension. When he finally stopped in front of her, he raised a hand and gently touched a lock of hair that fell over her face. "You're beautiful, Sophia," he said, his voice hoarse as if those words were a secret he had kept for a long time. Sophia felt her heart race. His touch was light, but it carried a warmth that she couldn't ignore. "Alexander," she began, but the words died on her lips. He leaned in slowly as if to give her the chance to pull back, but Sophia didn't move. When their lips finally met, it was as if the world around them disappeared. The kiss was slow but full of intensity, as if they were both putting into every movement everything they felt but had never said. When they broke apart, they were both breathless, but they didn't say anything. They just looked at each other, as if that moment spoke for itself. The next day at work, the atmosphere between them had changed. Although they tried to maintain their professional composure, there was a different energy that the others didn't take long to notice. "You seem more lively today," Matthew commented to Sophia with a curious smile. "I just slept well, I guess," she replied, trying to deflect the subject. Alexander, for his part, struggled to keep his attention on the meetings and tasks, but his mind often went back to the night before. Every time he saw Sophia in the corridors, He felt his chest tighten with a mixture of joy and nervousness. As the days went by, the bond between them grew, but it also brought new challenges. The comments in the office began to intensify, and Sophia felt the weight of being constantly watched and judged. "She's only here because of him," she heard someone say in a corridor. Sophia tried to ignore it, but it was impossible not to feel the impact of those words. Alexander also realized what was happening and began to protect her more actively. "Don't worry about what they say," he said one evening, after another exhausting meeting. "It's hard not to worry, Alexander. People will always see me as someone who doesn't belong in this world." He came closer, holding your hands. "You belong wherever you want to be, Sophia, and if you need me, I'll be here to remind you of that." His words gave Sophia the strength she needed, but they both knew that the obstacles were greater than just rumors. The difference in social class, the constant judgment, and the challenges of their own hearts made that love as beautiful as it was complicated. One evening, while reviewing a new campaign together, Alexander looked at Sophia and smiled. "Sometimes I think you're the only person who really knows me." Sophia laughed, but there was sincerity in her tone. "Maybe because I see beyond Alexander Sterling, the billionaire." He stared at her for a moment, feeling exposed but also grateful. "I never thought I could feel this way about anyone, Sophia." She held his hand, her expression soft but firm. "And I never thought that someone like you could come into my life and change it so much." They both knew they were walking into unknown territory, but it didn't matter. The love they shared was something worth fighting for. Even against all the odds, the world seemed ready to throw in their way. The room was silent, except for the sound of Sophia and Alexander's breathing as their lips parted. The kiss, charged with emotions they had both been suppressing, seemed like a moment stolen from time. They were both still processing what it meant when the door opened abruptly. "Mr. Sterling, I need—" Matthew began, rushing in. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Alexander and Sophia standing too close, their intimacy evident. Matthew's eyes went from one to the other, and the shock in his expression was unmistakable. "Matthew," Alexander began, trying to keep his composure. But Matthew had already taken a step back, his face hardening. He looked directly at Sophia, a mixture of surprise and something darker in his eyes. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice dry. Without waiting for an answer, he turned on his heels and left the room, closing the door firmly behind him. Sophia put her hand over her mouth, feeling the weight of what had just happened. "That was bad, wasn't it?" she whispered. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, clearly annoyed. He shouldn't have come in like that. "Alexander," he saw, "and you know how close Matthew is to the other employees. It will spread." "Let it spread," he replied, his voice firm. "I'm not going to hide, Sophia." But as confident as he tried to sound, Sophia knew that this was the beginning of something that neither of them could control. And Sophia was right. Matthew, still resentful of the scene he had witnessed, wasted no time in telling the other employees what he had seen. "You won't believe it," he said, approaching a small group in the break room. "Our dear Alexander Sterling and Miss Sophia were kissing in the office." "What?" exclaimed one of the women, clearly shocked. "That explains a lot," said another, with a mischievous smile. "I always thought she was trying to get ahead in life the easy way." The rumors spread like wildfire. In a matter of hours, practically all the employees knew about Alexander and Sophia's relationship. Murmurs and curious glances became frequent, and Sophia felt the weight of each one as she walked through the corridors. When she entered the meeting room for a presentation, the air seemed charged. Conversations ceased immediately, and eyes turned to her full of judgment. Sophia felt her face burn but held her head high. Alexander noticed her discomfort and, during the meeting, made a point of showing his support. He praised Sophia's work, making it clear that she was an essential part of the team. But this only fueled the rumors. The situation worsened when the press discovered the affair. A story appeared on a business gossip website with the headline, "CEO Alexander Sterling in romance with assistant. Relationship shakes corporate hierarchy." The article detailed the rumors, citing anonymous sources in the office. Photographs of Sophia leaving the company building were attached, hinting at meetings outside of working hours. When Sophia saw the article, she felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "Oh my God," she whispered, holding the phone with trembling hands. Alexander came up to her at the same moment, already aware of the publication. "It won't affect us," he said, trying to calm her down. "How can you say that?" she asked, tears flowing. "All the work I've done here. Everything will be reduced to this. They'll think I'm self-interested and had my eye on your money. No one will recognize my work." Alexander held her shoulders, looking directly into her eyes. "Sophia, I know you. And more importantly, I know how hard you've worked to do your job perfectly. They can say what they like, nothing should affect you. Wake up. I'm the owner of that company, and I'm not worried about what they say. Every company has gossip. The media loves it when it's about someone important. I'm not at all worried about what they think or what you think. I just don't want to see you sad or worried." Sophia wanted to believe his words, but the reality seemed overwhelming. The next few days were even more difficult. Paparazzi started appearing in front of the company, trying to capture images of the couple. Sophia felt like a prisoner, unable to leave without being followed. Within the company, the comments intensified. Some people avoided talking to her, while others made nasty comments in front of her. "Maybe she should resign," suggested one of the employees. Sophia heard these words as she walked down the corridor and felt tears forming, but she took a deep breath and kept walking. One evening, Alexander showed up at her apartment unannounced. He looked tired, but determined. "I can't keep seeing you go through this," he said, entering before Sophia could say anything. "You're acting the way they want you to, running away and suffering. I'm going to sort this out, Sophia. This gossip will stop, because none of this matters if I can't be with you." His words hit Sophia like an avalanche. She knew how much he was risking, but at the same time, she knew she couldn't ask him to do it. "Alexander, I don't want you imagining and creating more things there. Wouldn't it be better if I was fired? And I don't want to lose you or the professional you are." The silence that followed was interrupted by the sound of a ringing phone. It was Alexander's cell phone. He answered it quickly, but his expression changed. "Yes, I understand. I'm on my way." "What's wrong?" Sophia asked, worried. "The investors are demanding an emergency meeting. Something seems to have happened at the company." Sophia felt her heart squeeze. "You need to go." Alexander hesitated, but nodded. Before leaving, he held her face between his hands. "No matter what happens, Sophia, we'll still be together. You're all I want right now." At the meeting, the investors were clearly irritated by some figures and events. "This is unacceptable, Alexander," said one of them. "Your personal relationship is damaging the company's image. The rumors are that you're in a relationship with an underage boy who you yourself put to work for the company." "I'm not going to discuss my personal life," Alexander replied firmly. "But I can assure you that no decision I've made has been influenced by anything other than the best interests of Sterling Enterprises. What's more, Sophia is not a minor. She's 25 years old. The media is distorting this. There's someone inside the company making up stories to damage you. We need you to take steps to minimize the impact." Alexander knew what they were implying, but he refused to give in. "No problem. I'll sort it out. I know exactly who's making up all this gossip." The silence in the room was deafening. While Alexander sorted out this affair with the investors, Sophia faced her own demons. She knew their relationship was real, but the weight of the exposure seemed unbearable. She wondered if their love was strong enough to survive it all. That night, when Alexander returned to her apartment, he looked exhausted, but determined. "What happened?" Sophia asked. "They gave in. They won't interfere, as long as I keep everything under control. They know the media has blown it out of proportion, but there's someone inside the company making it all up." Sophia felt a wave of relief, but also guilt. "Alexander, I don't want you to lose anything because of me." He moved closer, holding her hands tightly. "The only thing I can't lose is you." His words made her realize that despite all the obstacles, their love was something worth fighting for. And together, they were ready to take on the world, no matter how difficult. Alexander was determined to find out who was behind the rumors and absurd accusations. His reputation and the future of his company were at stake, but above all, he wanted to protect Sophia. He assembled his security team and called for a discreet internal investigation. Within days, the truth began to emerge. Matthew, his longtime assistant, had been manipulating information, leaking rumors to the media, and even altering documents to cast doubt on Alexander's integrity. "Mister, "Sterling, we have found clear evidence," said one of the investigators, handing over a detailed report. Matthew was in direct contact with journalists and used confidential information to fuel gossip. Alexander clenched his fist, feeling a surge of anger. He had trusted Matthew for years, and now he was discovering that he had been the source of so much chaos. "Call Matthew into my office, now," Alexander ordered, his voice firm. When Matthew entered the room, his expression was one of defiance, but there was a slight hesitation in his movements. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Sterling?" Alexander stood up, holding the report in his hands. "Yes, Matthew. I want you to tell me why you decided to destroy the reputation of the company you helped build, and why you tried to tarnish Sophia's name." Matthew flinched, but tried to keep his composure. "I don't know what you're talking about." Alexander threw the report on the table, the pages spilling out in front of Matthew. "Don't play innocent. We have proof that you leaked information and made up stories, all because you couldn't deal with the fact that Sophia and I are together." Matthew's mask fell and he finally exploded. "Don't you see, since she arrived, everything has changed. She doesn't belong in this world, Alexander, and you're throwing it all away for someone who only wants your money." Matthew's words cut through the air like knives, but Alexander stood firm. "You're fired, Matthew. Leave before I have security escort you out." Matthew stood still for a moment, but realized he had no way out. He left the room, leaving Alexander alone. The next day, Alexander made a public statement. He explained that the rumors involving Sophia were false, the fruit of internal sabotage, and reaffirmed his commitment to the integrity of Sterling Enterprises. The press, realizing their mistake, began to change the tone of their stories, and the situation finally began to calm down. Meanwhile, Sophia was facing her own fears. Despite the love she felt for Alexander, she still questioned whether she was strong enough to face the challenges that came with being by his side. One evening, Alexander surprised Sophia by taking her out for dinner at an elegant but discreet restaurant. He wanted to show her that despite everything, they could still have happy times together. "Sophia, I know the last few months have been difficult, but I want you to know that there's nothing in this world I wouldn't do for you," he said, holding her hand across the table. "Alexander, I just want you to be happy." He smiled, but there was something else in his eyes. "You are my happiness, Sophia." Before she could reply, Alexander stood up, taking a small box out of his pocket. He knelt down in front of her, which made the few customers around turn around in surprise. "Sophia Bennett, you came into my life in an unexpected way and changed everything for the better. I never imagined I could love someone as much as I love you. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Sophia's face as she put her hands over her mouth in surprise and emotion. "Yes, Alexander, I do." The timid applause in the restaurant was drowned out by the embrace the two shared. At that moment, all the suffering and challenges they had been through seemed worth it. Over the next few months, Sophia and Alexander began planning their wedding, while life got back to normal. The wedding day arrived with the promise of a new beginning. Under a clear sky, surrounded by friends and a few family members, Alexander and Sophia exchanged vows in a simple but emotionally charged ceremony. As they danced for the first time as husband and wife, Alexander whispered in Sophia's ear, "We have faced everything and yet here we are. Nothing can separate us now." Sophia smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I never imagined that my life could be this happy, Alexander. Thank you for buying the sweets that day. I'm sure my father is happy to see us together right now." And so, against all odds, their love prevailed, an unexpected love that proved to be stronger than any obstacle, a love that transformed their lives forever. And so ends this story full of emotion, challenges, and above all, true love. Do you believe in love? Do you think it can overcome any obstacle, just as it did for Alexander and Sophia? Tell us in the comments the name of the person you've loved most in your life. We want to hear your stories and believe even more in the power of love. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel to follow more exciting stories, and click on the next video that appears on the screen. You won't want to miss what we've prepared for you. See you next time.